Happy Sunday, everybody. I think it's time for a reading. I'm going to tell you a story about the contribution of Spain and Portugal to the exchange and acclimatization of the new and old world crops. By a friend of mine, Dr. Victor Galleon Trade from the Canary Islands in Spain. Keywords: plant exchange, food production, farming practices. Abstract: from the mid-16th until the mid-17th centuries, crops from all continents were exchanged following the exploration voyages and commercial routes established by the Spanish and Portuguese. These exchanges modified not only farming practices, but also global food production and culinary habits. The Iberian Peninsula had long ago received crops of the Orient arrived through India, Persia, and Greece, as well as domestic animals and techniques from the Near East. The Muslim conquest added Iberian Peninsula was the meeting point of most crops known in the 15th century. All these crops and the agricultural technology were transferred to the New World directly from Iberia or through Madeira and the Canary Islands. Implantation in the Americas depended on the particular crops. Sugarcane, citrus, banana, date, and coconut palms were quickly successful, whereas cereals and legumes were less so. Iberian farmers soon accepted maize, potato, long staple cotton, and phaceolus beans that arrived from the New World. Generally, the Spanish spread these new crops around the Mediterranean, while the Portuguese did the same in the tropical belt, including India, the Far East, and coastal Africa. A notable addition was the Manila Galleon, which for almost 300 years shuttled between Acapulco and Manila. Despite unforeseen consequences, such as the introduction of human and plant diseases, pests, weed introductions, and erosion by old world domestic animals in America, the exchange produced great improvements in farming and derived industries and new hybrid cuisines. It was the first and truest agricultural and food globalization. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story or reading it to you is that I've started to take a deep dive recently. For years, we've heard about the Alphonse mango as being the most delicious mango in India and the preferred cultivar. And over the years, I mentioned or posted that the Alphonse is named for a Portuguese explorer who was the governor of India at one time, very famous explorer and warrior for the Portuguese crown, Alfonso de Albuquerque. And I always found it unusual, Albuquerque, New Mexico, but the Portuguese were never here in North America. And so I wondered about this name. I didn't pay much attention until recently. I started looking up the Portuguese trade routes. And what I found was there were at least 6, 7, maybe 10 famous Portuguese explorers, among them Magellan, who ultimately sailed for the Spanish crown. But there were famous names like Vasco da Gama and Almeida, etc., etc. But one of probably the most impressive was Alfonso de Albuquerque. He had 5 trips from Portugal to India, which normally took an average of a year to make, and sent back a lot of spices from India and wealth to the king. And he was a very, very interesting person. And I've been following on YouTube a wonderful channel called Flashpoints in History. And we learn about Malacca, and we learn about India, and we learn about Macau and Formosa, which is Taiwan today. But the Portuguese play a big role, and they got the mono-embryonic cultivars to Brazil, and the Spaniards, on the other hand, brought the Carabao, the grandfather of the Ataulfo, to Acapulco and the Manila Galleon Trade for over 300 years. The Carabao came to Mexico. It transformed itself into the Manila mango, which is the favorite mango in all of Mexico, and it can't make it to the States with the exception of fruit that gets ionized or irradiated at the irradiation facility in San Luis Potosí and now in Aguascalientes. But the thin skin of the Manila makes it a delicious fruit. They're a high Brix fruit, but the Ataulfo has a thick enough skin where it can take the hot water treatment, and now has really been responsible for the 50% increase in consumption of mangoes in North America, and much more so than the poor Florida cultivars that really don't have the flavor. They come in at maybe a 12 or 13, 14 Brix on a high day, but the polyembryonic fruit comes in the 20s. So there's a marked difference flavor-wise. The flavor profile's much more. And then there's a big question mark, because the oldest city in North America is St. Augustine in Florida, which was discovered in 1513 and was later founded. And it's the longest permanent establishment in North America, from about 1536, or at least in America. There might be older cities in Mexico, but I'll have to look that up and tell you all about that. But the big question mark is it Florida, because of its tropical jungle-like swamp inhabitable environment, really was isolated from the rest of the colonies. And for some strange reason, even though the Spaniards brought the Carabao to the Americas and to Mexico particularly, we didn't get any polyembryonic mangoes in Florida. And my most recent interview with our dear friend, Dr. Norris Ledesma, we took a little a tour around Florida, and mentioned some of the cultivars and some of the pockets in Florida, like Pine Island, and of course, Coconut Grove, or the Hayden with a Y, Hayden, the Hayden mango that belonged to an Army captain, retired, who never got to taste the fruit. But anyway, and then of course you've got Pine Island, and you've got Merritt Island, which is up near Cocoa Beach, up near the Kennedy Space Center. And I guess somehow on the East Coast, the mangoes don't make it very far north. They sort of stall around Merritt Island, around Cocoa Beach. I'll have to look into now what we've been able to find, the latitude in California. They're growing mangoes outside of San Francisco, which is a shock. Now, here in San Diego County, here's an interesting thing for you. I've told you in some of our episodes on agrimundo.tv that Paul Thompson was the founder of the rare fruit growers groups that now are worldwide, but the first one was founded here in San Diego County. And San Diego County is very unusual because, just as an example, the country of Peru has 30 some odd different climates, pockets where you get different climate situations, adaptability for different plants. But here in San Diego, we have 120, 4 times what the country of Peru has. Now, Colombia has a lot of pockets, and it's a real fascinating place to grow different types of fruits and vegetables. But I just wanted to finish up on this story. I'll get into more detail. Clark Brandon and I are working on a film that will tell this story about how the Portuguese and the Spaniards had a treaty and they divided the world in half. And the Portuguese took Asia, India, Asia, Africa, and the line sort of cuts off part of Brazil, the little shoulder that comes out into the Atlantic. But ultimately, the Portuguese took over all of Brazil, and that treaty fell apart as Spain lost power and sold off properties to, the new founded United States of America. But anyway, we'll get more into this, and we'll take a deep dive into the difference between a polyembryonic mango, which comes from Southeast Asia, and a monoembryonic, which is predominantly from India. There are some polyembryonics, and we're going to continue this fascinating search for the genesis, which might be two cousins, might be the difference between the Homo sapien and the Neanderthal. We don't know, but we're going to get there. So thank you for indulging me this little story, and I hope Clark can turn this into a video or at least a bonus episode for DMI Media and Agrimundo.tv. Soy su anfitrión, Will Caban, y nuestro productor ejecutivo, el señor Clark Brandon. Gracias por acompañarnos. Thank you, dear friends. Have a lovely and blessed Sunday. Look forward to